Good evening, everyone. My name is Barbara Kirk. I serve as one of the attorneys for Lower Makefield Township. Tonight is the regular scheduled meeting of the Township's Planning Commission. The first item on the agenda is to call to order. If everybody can identify themselves for the record, it would be appreciated.
Adrian Costello's here.
Dawn Stern here.
Virginia Gill.
Thank you.
And Jim Majewski. Andy.
Andy?
Andrew Pokel, Township Engineer, Remington Vernick Engineers.
And Fred Weiss, Supervisor Liaison to the committee.
Great.
We don't have Tony Bush here.
No, Ross Brush is not available tonight.
I
He's
know, but
another member.
we didn't hear Tony.
Tony's here.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, good commercial there, Jim.
The next item on the board's agenda is the reorganization, which they must do at the beginning of each and every calendar year at their first meeting. As such, sitting in until the chairperson is appointed, I will take a motion or nomination for person to be chair of this commission.
I'd like to make a motion, Barbara, that Adrian Costello be chair.
Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Mr. Costello, yes, aye.
I guess so, yes.
Congratulations, you've been appointed chair. You can now take over for the motions to have the vice chair and secretary appointed.
Okay, I'll take a motion for vice chair. Any motions?
Yeah, I'd like to make a motion that Dawn Stern be vice chair.
I'd like to remain as secretary if possible.
Dawn, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
She said she would rather be secretary.
Okay. I'll make another motion. To gender, I'd like to make a motion that you be vice chair.
I'll
Sure.
second it, I guess.
Anyone second that motion?
I believe Mr. Costello did.
Yeah. And is that, I guess I probably should wait, but just like keep it moving.
There's a motion
Any
and a second.
discussion? Any discussion on that? Okay, call the motion. All in favor for DeJander as
Aye.
vice chair? Aye. So what was that? Was that a 4-0? Did everyone reply?
And then the last
yes.
position, Mr. Costello would be secretary for the board.
Okay, well, I'll open that up for a motion.
Like to make a motion that Dawn Stern be the secretary.
Any seconds?
I'll second it.
Okay. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All right. We're so organized now.
Congratulations, everyone.
Oh, thanks, Barb. All right, I gotta pull up this agenda now. Do I have it open? What was next? I guess the minutes. Did everyone get a
Yes.
chance to look at the minutes from last meeting?
Yes.
All right, does anyone want to make a motion to approve the minutes from last meeting?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from last meeting.
Any seconds?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
All right, is that 4-0? Did I hear everyone?
Yes.
Okay, All right, so, the next, I guess, the only other item, correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, is the approving the annual report.
Actually, the next item on the agenda
is
is
it?
approval of the sewage facilities planning modules,
Shoot, that's right.
component 4A for the 1273 Lindenhurst Road subdivision. One of the requirements for sewage facility planning modules is that the planning commission or the planning agency reviews compliance or conformance of those planning modules with community planning regulations. I've filled out that form and checked it. I'll share my screen right now.
Thank you.
Basically, the date that they were received was back in December. Today is the date that I hope the review will be completed. We do have a municipal comprehensive plan adopted under the municipality's planning code. The plan is consistent with that. It's consistent with the use, development, and water resources component of that plan. And there's no encroachments on any wetlands or anything like that. There's no known impact on historical or archaeological resources. You may recall that this is the subdivision that we had reviewed a few years ago as a sketch plan. There's an existing historic house on the property. That historic house is being preserved. They did receive a variance in order to allow slightly higher density to allow 2 additional lots, which enabled the developer to preserve that house. So therefore, there's no impact of this project on historical or architectural resources. There's no impact on endangered or threatened species. We do have municipal zoning ordinance, and it is not consistent with the zoning ordinance to the extent that a variance needed to be granted for the density. That was granted by our zoning hearing board last year. Those zoning approvals have been obtained. We do have a subdivision and land development ordinance, of which this proposal is consistent with that. The plans have been submitted to us a while back. They were reviewed by all of our reviewing agencies and our committees, and the applicant is revising the plans to come back with a clean plan in order to get approval from the township. And this plan is consistent with our municipal official sewage facilities plan. And there are no other wastewater disposal needs in the area that should be considered by the municipality. So with that, I believe that's all there is. And if the board so makes a motion, you can vote to have that signed and submitted to the applicant so they could further work on their sewage facility planning module application to DEP.
All right, so I guess I'll put out, does anyone want to make a motion?
So this is in accordance with the December 7th letter? Jim? Is that?
Oh, that's when they submitted the actual form to us to fill out. We actually fill out the form since we're the planning agency. I filled it out on behalf of the planning commission and just reviewed the items with you that we filled out.
Okay, so anything that's set forth in this letter will be taken care of as far as further requirements?
Yeah, this is just one component of the application they make to DEP. There are other portions of that that are being worked on with the sewer engineers from Aqua and the developer, and they have to address those items before they have a full planning module to submit to the DEP. This is just one component, just saying that what they're doing is consistent with our municipal plans, which it is.
Okay.
Okay. So the only thing that doesn't make this and really boilerplate is the one variance they got. Correct?
Correct.
Okay, so now we're clear on that. Does anyone want to make a motion?
I'll make a motion that we approve the sewage facilities planning modules component 4A for 1273 Lindenhurst Road.
Okay, any second?
I'll second.
Okay. All right, now that we're clear on it, is there any further discussion, questions anyone has on this to clarify before we vote? I guess I should ask, is there any public comment?
Nope, there is no public comment.
Okay, well, if we don't have any comment, does everyone want to take a vote? All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. All right, it's 4-0.
Okay, the next item on the agenda, and we could just go a little bit out of order and go right to the 2022 annual report.
Yeah.
I provided everyone within their packet an annual report of all of our activities. It outlines all of these subdivisions that were voted on and discussed, in addition with a meeting-by-meeting summary of the actions taken and issues discussed by the Planning Commission. If everything appears to be in order, then we would need a motion to approve that plan as submitted.
All right, so let's first open up to a motion. Does anyone want to make a motion to approve the 2022 annual report as drafted by Jim and sent to us?
I'll make a motion to approve the 2022 annual report.
Okay, any seconds?
I'll second the motion.
Okay. All right, now we have motion on the floor. Is there any comment or questions or anything about what's included in Jim's draft? Seemed pretty straightforward. No one? Okay. I'll put it to a vote then. All in favor of approving the 2022 annual report, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. 4-0. All
Okay,
right.
and item number 5 in the agenda was continued discussion of the proposed ordinance to amend the dimensional standards in the residential zoning districts to provide for and to establish mandatory open space requirements. I know where we left off at the last meeting, there were a few questions that were made about some of the definitions of open space. I've looked into that and found just a few inconsistencies that just need to be cleared up a little bit. So I'll just go over that real briefly.
Okay.
Let's see. So under our zoning ordinance, we currently have several definitions that sometimes get confusing. They have common open space, which is just land that intended for the use or enjoyment of the residents, not including areas that normally wouldn't be considered open space, such as streets, parking areas, areas set aside for facilities, detention and retention basins, or resource protected land. Open space is defined as C common open space, although common open space I think was supposed to be mainly for multifamily type of uses. And it looks like I copied that again, didn't need to be in there. And then I have another definition of open lands. And open lands include resource protected lands, including farmland, which is part of a farmland preservation conditional use development. And so we need to clarify that just slightly, because I think the intent in our ordinance, we talk about providing open space. I think we're talking about providing open land, which is encompassing of resource protected lands and actual open space that is usable. So it's sort of a combination of the two. And in the subdivisional land development, we have the same thing where the common open space does not include all those areas or resource protected land, whereas open lands are resource protected lands, including farmland. And the intent of our ordinance, I think, was to do open lands. So we just need to make a slight adjustment to our proposed ordinance so that it's clear between zoning and saldo that we're talking about the 25% is supposed to be open land, which is inclusive of open space and resource protected land. So it's sort of a combination. If you had a piece of ground that was unencumbered by any kind of resources, you could get 25% of the land as minimum of actual land to be used as open space for whatever purpose we deem appropriate.
Jim, would that be up to Lower Makefield or the developer
As far as what?
in terms of whether the 25% would be sort of resource protected or usable open space?
Well, they have to provide a minimum of 25%, however they provide it. If you had a land that was encumbered by a lot of resources, they can't build on those. So they're effectively preserving a certain percentage of the land. If they had 1% of the land as open space, and I'll show you an example in a minute, which actually goes through that worst case scenario where you have a land that's beautiful for development. If they had just 1% of the land as open space, they'd have to provide the other 24%, or 1% is resource protected land. The other 24% would have to be open space of some kind. If you had a property with 19% resource protected land that couldn't be built on, then they would provide an extra 6% of open space on the property, so that the net effect is no matter what, we're getting 25% of the property being not built upon, not used by roads, buildings, facilities, and
Okay.
the like.
Can I ask a question on that then? So let's just say like today, help me make sure I understand this right. Today, we don't have this requirement. So let's just say somebody has a piece of land they want to develop, and 25% of it is on wetlands, some sort of protected, land that is not really developable or is limited to develop, they can limit in a very limited manner develop it. And so what would they do in that case right now?
Right now, they would be required to preserve those resource protected lands. We would consider that open lands, and they couldn't build on that because they have that constrained by those resource protected lands. They're allowed for a higher density. So as the density goes up, as the resource protected land goes up, the density goes up, and that's under our current ordinance.
Okay.
So this takes the land that would not be resource protected and makes them set aside land, essentially almost making it like resource protected land. Only the resource is just open land, open space for whatever purpose we deem desirable.
But the scenario that I just brought up, it essentially, what you're telling me, other than getting them to commit some percentage of land, if it's less than 25% that's already protected, nothing's really changed from our current mode of operation. Is that what
Pretty
I'm
much?
Okay.
Yeah. The only other change we made is that we made it a sliding scale. Right now, our density kind of jumps up at different categories, and it's kind of goofy. If you're at like 1%, it's at one density number. And then if you go 1% higher, suddenly you go up to a much higher number in one big jump. This smooths that out to make it just make more sense.
Okay.
It's similar to the problem we have with our impervious surface, where we jump at a certain lot size and it just goes up and down, and it doesn't make sense. And I'll show you an example of a piece of land that is mostly unencumbered by resources that how it would affect that.
The only thing I would add is, that we do get occasionally developers where they come in and they ask for a variance because for a higher encroachment on resource protected land, because they want to get another lot into their development.
Mm-hmm.
And they come in and they'll ask for a variance for encroachment on resource protected land. Whereas if they do a cluster development, they might be able to bring the houses closer together and then not require a variance to encroach on resource protected land. So I could envision a scenario where this helps in that regard.
Yeah, I guess I still go back on this thing. I still am not clear where the limit is for the developer out there, and we all know that they're out there that will try and take advantage of this.
Well, there isn't really much of an advantage to them. Although I think I pointed out the advantages and disadvantages. And at the end of the day, it comes out pretty close to equal. And I'll show you an example. I tried to pick a property that was not very encumbered by any kind of resources. There's a farm across from the Patterson farm.
Yep.
That's a little over 100 acres. I think it's about 110 acres. When you take away the ultimate right-of-ways, you get down a little bit less, but there's basically no woodlands, no wetlands, no streams, very limited amounts of steep slopes. And theoretically, with 1 acre zoning, they could put however many lots on it. And I'll go through an example of the site capacity calculations that I did for that property. So under our current zoning, what you do is you get to what the base side area is, and that's basically your overall lot area, less the areas that are within transmission right-of-ways. Like if you had the transcontinental gas pipeline, that would be netted out. It nets out ultimate right-of-ways for the major roads. And then you have other resource protected lands. On this property, there's only, I think, 1.5 acres roughly of steep slopes in the 8 to 15% category. So only 0.71 acres out of the 106.5 base site area acres are encumbered by resources. So this is a property that basically, if they developed it, it's a net buildable site area of 105.81 acres. If they developed it and did it with resource protected land or with recreation land, with recreation land, they would be able to get 100 lots out of it theoretically. With the fee in lieu of recreation land, they theoretically get 105 lots out of it. However, those numbers don't quite match reality. Since it's 1 acre zoning, you can't put 100 lots on 105 acres because you need land for roads.
Yep.
You need land for stormwater management. You basically lose 10 to maybe 15% of your land just in your roadway network and your stormwater management basins that would be required throughout the property. Under the proposed zoning, the site capacity calculations change a little bit in that we now have that minimum 25% open space, which could be a combination of resource protected land and or open space as we currently have it defined in the ordinance. Using that percentage, you get a net buildable site area of 79.9 acres. So basically, out of the 105 acres, they're losing about 25 acres of the property to either us, a homeowners association, or some other entity who would preserve that land not to be used for any other purposes other than open space. When you apply the higher density, the last density I showed, the density was 1 unit per acre. In the cluster ordinance, you have 1.25 dwelling units per acre. And the size of lots go down, so they could put smaller lots on there. So you basically don't lose that usable ground to roads and basins because the smaller lot size takes that into account. So at the end of the day, based on these calculations, you get anywhere from 94 to 99 lots on the property. So to compare the two, basically in our current zoning regulations, this is one of the larger properties we have that's available currently. You get 90 to 95 lots, depending if you have recreation land and facilities or not. And under the proposed, you'd have 94.99. So it's basically, they would net a few extra lots potentially. But we would pick up 25 acres of open space.
So can I ask a question? Because I just want to make sure I understand this. I know this first started out as potentially a cluster overlay for open space. And then it got changed to be a revision to preserve 25%. Is this 25% going to be preservation of open space exclusive of resource protected lands? Or is it 25% minimum open space that can include resource protected lands?
It can include resource protected lands.
So we're going to define it as preservation of open space being common open space plus open lands.
Correct.
Okay.
And I still haven't finalized how to make that minor adjustment in the language, but I think open lands, the way we have it defined in the ordinance, is the proper terminology. And then what we need to do is just make sure that it matches throughout the ordinance. I did a search and found the half dozen to dozen places where those words are mentioned. And I just want to make sure that's consistent between throughout zoning, throughout saldo, and between zoning and saldo.
So does it make sense to include a revision to the definitions section of the zoning ordinance where it's set out what open lands mean, what open space means, and then just give a common term for the purposes of this ordinance that incorporates both?
Yes. Because I think in our ordinance, the only place that they really require, well, there's a couple of places where they require open space as defined. One is in a, I think like a Makefield Glen type project. They require 40% common open space. In our ordinance, we say that open space equals common open space. And I think the way we change that is to just make those two distinctions, that there's common open space, which is required under certain multifamily or high density zoning, and open space, which will be inclusive of open lands. And I just have to figure out, do we use the word open lands, open space, change the definition of open space to be open lands and the such, and make sure that it's all consistent throughout.
Jim, sticking with the definitions, for open lands, and I know we had some conversation about this before, is it contemplated that they would be owned by the township or a homeowners association? So what are you envisioning this ordinance has?
Well, under our saldo, we have, and actually under zoning too, I believe. It's under both, and that just needs to be tweaked just slightly to make sure they're consistent too.
Which one do you think it would, what is the goal of this ordinance? To make it one or the other or both?
I think it would be both, because you don't want to put such an extreme burden on the township to have to maintain all the open lands. And in some developments, like the Marazzo townhomes, their homeowners association will be responsible to maintain it. So I think the goal was to keep the section dealing with the ownership that Jim had shown under 200-74, where it could be dedicated to the township. It could be owned by a condo or homeowners association. There could be a dedication to farmland preservation if it fell within that arena, or some sort of land trust or conservancy type thing. I think we were going to stay consistent with that.
The reason I'm asking is because during the last meeting, Jim, you had pointed out the one example, which I think you were not familiar with, that had until recently was actually owned by the town, right off of Big Oak in the townhouse development. They're not Big Oak Bend. I think it's across the street from Big Oak Bend. Something Blossom Road. There's a horseshoe shaped road, and there's a big open space there that's actually owned by the township as dedicated recreation space, I think, but there's nothing really there, nor has there ever really been anything there other than there used to be a bus shelter, which was removed probably a decade or more ago. So if the town's going to take parcels of land like that, there should be a plan for them, whatever the plan's going to be. Leave them fallow, do something with them. But it's almost as if the town took that property and then forgot about it.
We took the property and forgot about it. It wasn't on really an inventory. I don't even know who maintains it.
I think the
it-
EAC was doing an inventory of open lands in the township, if I remember correctly from one of the last supervisor meetings.
Not really. They're doing a different type of.
Oh, they're
thing.
doing a
That's-
different
yeah.
one.
Those kinds of things need to be really done up front so that.
Oh, exactly.
All through the cracks. And then
And that's why we actually did an inventory of all of our township properties a couple of years ago. And it was surprising some of the parcels of land we own, and also surprising some of the parcels of land that we thought we owned and that we've maintained. And it turns out we didn't have ownership, that Barbara has been working for the last year or two, slowly whittling that down to, I think we have them all, but one or two resolved. 3.
So how is that determined though, this 25% dedicated to the township or owned by an HOA? Is that developer driven or just comes out in the planning process or?
Well, that would be through the planning process. If the township wanted the land for a specific purpose, we could have that dedicated to us. If they wanted it, if we didn't want it, we could say, why didn't you put it in the form of an HOA? It would have to be whatever makes sense, as we do in all developments, except for that one that Tony mentioned, where it's just ironic that we called it out as recreation land and Parks Department didn't even know they owned it. So,
Yeah, that, my point would be that, you know, the developer can offer it for dedication and the township can reject it. And the township doesn't have to accept it for dedication.
Well, and
I just had one other thing before we go on about the definitions of the resource protected land. I think the issue came up last time about encroachment to the extent that there is, you know, of that 25%, some of it's resource protected. What do we do to prevent encroachment? Because you can go through pretty much any development in this township where there's resource protected lands and there's encroachment everywhere. It just happens over time. Sometimes it happens right away. Sometimes it takes 10, 15, 20 years, but it happens. And a lot of homeowners, they may not even know that it's resource protected land because they're not the first homeowner, or they are the first homeowner and they just don't care anymore. And they start encroaching. So is there something that we had talked about, maybe putting in something about encroachment on resource protected lands, if that's a significant portion of the 25%?
yeah, well, when we updated the ordinance, God, I guess it's 15 years ago now. When we did that ordinance update, we put in there that we needed to mark the open space in some fashion so that it can be easily found out by people. And I think it's worked out pretty well, although we haven't had a lot of subdivisions since then. And then we've come up with policies internally, actually as part of the park planning process. They wanted to know, what's our policy on defense against encroachments? And I said, well, you know what? We should have a policy and we should have it in writing. We developed that policy and we've been working on that now. We have one development that is just, the open space was silly the way they laid it out. The open space in the one development I'm thinking of, which I don't want to name, never should have been open space. It was just little slivers of land in between lots that made absolutely zero sense, that many of the neighbors have encroached upon. And now we have to deal with the headache of figuring out how to resolve it. But going forward, that's why we have under Saldo open space requirements that the land has to be a certain width to qualify as being open space, like 75 feet wide. It has to have a length to width ratio that somewhat makes sense so that it's a corridor between things, or has a definable or discernible area that you could picture as these are open lands for the benefit of either the residents within the development or throughout the community.
So, Jim, what is a policy that the town now has about encroachment on open space?
Well, now we have the benefit of aerial photography and GIS mapping from the county. And when we did our township inventory, at that time, I could see right on the map a number of places where people had encroached. We've actually notified several of those people because we kind of have a running list. As anything comes up, we say, oh, by the way, you need to move this, you need to move that. We've gone out and told them that you can't have a shed on our property. You can't have your swing set, your trampoline. But the policy is that we'll notify those people that they're encroaching on our property and that they have to remove it in a reasonable amount of time. I could share with you what the policy is. It's actually on our website too. If you go to the Capra Park Planning, it's in the voluminous number of documents in there.
It's good that it's publicly available.
And-
Yeah.
And also, Tony, on some matters where I've been asked by the township to participate in zoning hearings where it's dealing with like a lesser buffer between the structure and a resource protected area. As part of any approval, if that's going to be done by the zoning board, I've asked for the property owner to submit a declaration of restrictions that identifies the area so that it's recorded in Doylestown that nobody can build in that area, that resource protected area. So we've been trying to do an additional level of, I guess you could say, protection to ensure that it doesn't slip through the cracks.
And I think that's worked out quite well, that I like to do that for all subdivisions where there's any kind of, yeah. So it's right there in the title report. It's in the deed that you are subject to this. And actually, if you look at the house down at the corner, Sandy Run Road and Edgewood Road, that's when we did the restrictive covenant that's recorded in the county. So it shows up on a deed. And also we delineated the limit of the wetlands through fencing there so that unless they're really crafty and decide to try to move the fence over time, which it sounds funny, but actually someone did that with farmland preservation. They took a fence and moved it. Only they were discovered and they had to move it back. So we do have to try to keep an eye on these things. And we have a much better grasp on it now. Just knowing what the township owns in the way of land is kind of interesting.
So what would be what would prevent, like, I'm just thinking like 10 years down the road, none of us are doing this stuff 10, 15 years down the road. Someone else comes through and that HOA decides they don't really want this thing and can they try and subdivide it out or cut it out? What's to prevent them when none of the people involved were there? What's to prevent that from happening?
If they decide that they're going to subdivide it, they have to bring it to the township for approval. So it's not like they can just subdivide it out. And generally, when the HOA is responsible for maintaining, there are provisions in their HOA documents that they have to provide notice to the township if they're going to do certain things that are not consistent with the original development approval.
Okay, but it's conceivable though, an HOA could come in 10 years on the road. You have a board of supervisors with a different mindset 10 years from now, and they could just say, yeah, we'll grant you a waiver and let you sell it.
It is.
Well, it actually wouldn't be a waiver, it would be a variance.
Or
And
variance.
they would have to go to the zoning hearing board and they'd have to make their case.
Okay,
And I'm not sure how they could make a case for that. It's just, there's no hardship. They developed under the rules of the land. They didn't challenge it at the time. You know, if you challenge it at the time, you might be able to get something out of it. But other than that, no, it's very difficult to do that.
It would be a change to the record plan at the county as well, right, Jim?
Change of the record plan. The restrictions are recorded in the county, conservation easements, and the like. And this in case wouldn't be an easement. This would actually be land.
Right.
So it's real land, it's real estate that, except for the people who try to slowly encroach on it, that we have to keep an eye on. It is real land.
Okay.
Jim, just a quick question then. So say for the proposal that came up before, for the development off of Big Oak, on that one, so they have those, I think it was 4 or 5 houses, and there's a bunch of forest, I guess, trees that they're not kind of cutting down, they're kind of keeping, and they're not within any of the property lines, but it's within that development. Would you take into account that those trees, that land as 25%, or it had to be just barren land as counted at 25%?
Well, that plan would have had to have been modified slightly. It would basically have been a more contiguous area that would be woodlands that would be preserved, and the houses would have been clustered down a little bit more to limit the area. So you would have had basically an unobstructed piece of woods. I forget how big that property was. I think it was maybe 5 or 6 acres, if I recall. I think 6 acres maybe. So 25% of 6 acres is, I can't do the math. Thank you.
A little less than 2.
Yeah. So they would have had to provide like that 1.5 acres of land to of woodlands, and then make all their stuff work around that. And so it would be sort of clustered into one area or in one strip of land or in something that would make sense to be viewed as open space.
Okay, so the woodlands would be considered then part of the open space.
Yeah, the woodlands would be considered open space, but they would have had to alter the layout from what they proposed.
Okay.
Jim, if I may interject, I think we're going on a little bit of a tangent to what the Board of Supervisors' intent is to get this ordinance on the books. And since I'm the guy who started this thing, the intent of the ordinance is not to add more homes to the land. If the tract in R1 zoning, say, is entitled to 100 homes, that's considering the protected areas, adding 25% of open space, you'd still be able to get 100 homes, but on smaller lots. It's that simple. So I would disagree with the concept of using protected lands and woodlands, wetlands as part of that 25% open space. So if a 100-acre tract has 15 acres of protected lands already, the amount of homes that would be allowed on that without open space would be, we'll say, 85 homes. The cluster development ordinance, or whatever we want to call it, would, if you put in an additional 25%, you could get the same amount of homes on smaller lots. That's what we're trying to accomplish. So whatever wording is accepted by the commission, it's, you have that intent should be in mind. So I take a little issue with what Mr. Majewski says.
Yeah.
Is that we the intent is to have more open space, but the same homes, same number of homes. So on R1 zoning or R2 zoning or whatever we put in the ordinance, Barbara can put that in. But the intent is to have more open space, but smaller lots, but no more homes.
That is exactly what the ordinance has. The example I showed, even though it says that you'd have more homes, in reality, you don't have more homes. It just shows that the developer isn't really getting shafted, is kind of the end result of it all.
But as I understand what
Yeah.
Mr. Weiss is saying, it's open space, not including resource protected lands.
Yeah, that's a big disconnect right there.
Yeah,
Well, then we'd have to
that-
completely rewrite the entire thing from scratch.
because
That's what he's just saying.
because the for R1 zone, I mean, just for example, if we have 10 acres of protected space, the current ordinance would allow for let's say 80 homes. This ordinance would allow for an additional 25% open space with the same amount of homes, just smaller lots.
Okay.
So we
That's
end
not
up
the way
with
it's
a lot.
written.
Yeah, it should have been like that. And that's why we go through the planning
Yeah.
commission. We have this because it straightens everything out, plus public comment. But
This,
yeah.
this kind of gets us back to an issue that we discussed the last time, that I don't know how this wrinkle, which we hadn't discussed before, plays into it. But one of the concerns that I think Adrian brought up and we all kind of chimed in on was the Harris tract.
Yeah.
Because the way this is worded, that tract, it sounds like could have been developed the way the developer wanted to without
Yes.
having to get permission. And the town wanted to have the developer take environmental remediation on site. And that wouldn't have been required under this ordinance, or at least what we saw the last time around. How does this, Jim, does this new wrinkle change that? What happens to that?
I'd have to take a look at that just to see, because
I just think for me, it's really important for me to support this. It's got to clarify that the open space has to come out of developable land,
correct.
not any land, developable land.
And that's the intent that the board wanted to go forward with this. And I apologize for the board if it didn't come out that way. And Adrian is exactly right. Whatever
It's not all developable.
it has. We want open space. We want additional open space. Protected space is already open. It's not going to change. So, the intent would be to add additional open space.
Yes.
Not change the calculation of how many homes are on that space, just allowing for smaller lots. And as far as the Harris tract is concerned, I can't answer what would have happened because now it's subdivided anyway, and we have developable land and undevelopable land. And you can't, if the owner of the land wanted to undivide 30, the acreage, then it would be an addition, it would be probably an interesting, experience for us all.
But yeah, cause look, my whole thing is here. I love open, that's one of the reasons I got involved in going to board of supervisor meetings was open space. But I think with the idea of going for open space, you can't lose sight of the fact that there are other things that our township, without being an expert on all these things, but there are other things that the township was trying to accomplish with its ordinances around R1, R2, and the density calculations and everything like that. And I have a real hard time with the fact that there's no limit to this thing. So like that 100-acre property on Yardley Newtown Road, theoretically, you could take a quarter or a third of that, put one of those new style neighborhoods where essentially it's house against house against house, right up to where the setbacks are, and then leave the other third untouched, and they still get their 100 houses. They're just on now 25 acres, not 75 acres, not 100 acres. And I still think there's a density requirement that at some point overrides our want for open space next to really highly dense housing, depending on which area, what other things the master plan's trying to accomplish. And I just worry about this thing. I've seen enough developers try and get away with things. Somebody without those limits on here is going to come through, and we're going to say, oh crap, we didn't think about that. And they're going to get and do something that people in the township are not going to like.
Well, the ordinance does state that they can't get any more units than they could
If it was not.
if it was not.
But let me ask
Open
you a
space.
question, Jim, because The letter from Bucks County Planning Commission asked for revisions to the draft ordinance to include certain dimensions like maximum density and number of units per acre. If you have 100 acres, and let's just argue for argument's sake that there's no resource protected lands, it's just totally open developable land, and 25% has to be preserved as open space. That would be 25 acres, leaving 75 acres to otherwise say allow 100 homes. Do we say that the size of the lots get reduced proportionately to the overall percentage of what is removed?
Yes.
Does that would that
Yeah.
make it easier if we include that specific language in the ordinance, that the size of each otherwise applicable lot will be reduced in proportion to the overall amount being preserved?
Yeah, no, that I didn't even think of it from that angle, Barb. I think it would have to do that. But my
Doesn't that make
concern
it
is,
easier?
yeah, no,
I think that's actually
my
what it
concern
says
was
already.
even different. I didn't even think of, my concern was more, what's to stop a developer to say, I'll give you 60% and I'll do my 100 houses now on 4/10 of an acre lot. Or I'll give you 75% and I'll do it on quarter acre lots.
Because he wouldn't be able to do that automatically. He'd have to get variance approval or the supervisor's approval as part of the land development.
But
Actually,
this,
Adrian's right. They could go down to
Yeah.
much smaller lot sizes.
they would have to get
The benefit
approval
we get
to
is
the-
that we get half the property preserved. If
But I
that's
mean,
the benefit.
And that's the benefit on open space, but at some point you are, I think, doing the township a disservice with some of the other goals and objectives that the township has. And if we didn't have goals and objectives in terms of density of housing in specific areas and things like that, we wouldn't have an R1, R2, and R3. You
But
gotta,
you could recommend a minimum lot size.
yeah, we have to have a minimum lot size, within a minimum variance from the standard lot size for whatever district that they're in, something. There's got to be a control on that end of it. Otherwise, somebody is going to take advantage of it.
What's reasonable? Is it,
Well-
10% variance?
Well, here's the other thing, though. Keep in mind, each residential district has different density requirements.
No, and that's what I mean. It has to be per, if you're R3, I'm not going to tell you have to keep it to a 3/4 acre lot. But, because that the standards might be different, R2. But R1, okay, you can take it down from 1 acre lot to what's the smallest we want to develop. Like you take this one big farm, and what's the smallest we want those 100 homes lots to be? Because they're not going to be spread all over. They're going to be pushed into one area because the other pieces of it are going to be woods or field or whatever. But that one little area is going to have smaller and smaller lots.
Well, that's taken up by the maximum density though.
But I
But
thought
wouldn't-
we're giving easement to the maximum density. The more land they give, the less requirements for lot sizes they have to have.
And that is correct, but we do have a minimum on there.
Oh,
The
what is the
minimum
min-
size we have for anything is 15,000 square feet, which is a little more than a third of an acre, which is probably, I'd say half the lots that exist in Lower Makefield.
But if the rest of the zoned area, if it's 1 acre lots, a third of an acre is pretty small.
It's going to stand out.
Oh, absolutely.
That's,
So does it make sense to say at no time shall the size of the lot be reduced by more than 25%?
Then I think we have to drastically rewrite the entire ordinance. If you look at the farmland preservation section of the township, those lots are 15,000 square foot minimum. So if you see all those developments, Leadham's Field, Farm Field, Brookfield, Those lots range, typically they're probably like 15,000 to 20,000 square feet. The variation is mainly based on just the way the road's configured with the boundaries of it. So if you think those lots are too small, which those lots, including my own neighborhood, which is a farmland preservation development, Heather Ridge, that's probably half the housing stock in the R1 zoning district already has these smaller lot sizes. So it's not like a completely foreign concept in the township. I'll provide everyone with more information after I've taken a look at that. I'll have to take a look at Fred's thing because that dramatically changes everything, and I'm not sure how you'd even do it then. So we'll take a look at it.
So another question I had while we're in the process of doing this is, did everybody have a chance to review the comments provided by the Bucks County Planning Commission? And if so, are you recommending that those comments be incorporated into the final version of the proposed ordinance? Just so we know what we're doing.
I see those.
Some of that is affected by what we just discussed right now.
Yes,
Yeah.
In terms of lot size. Actually, a lot of it's.
it's going to be,
Yeah.
probably it's going to be,
is
yeah.
affected. I don't think it's a question we can answer.
I never recall looking at it, but I don't think, given everything that's been said tonight, that it's, again, something you can really give an answer to.
And I guess, Jim, the other issue that you were going to tell us about, if, I don't know if you looked at, was how many large open properties there might be in the town that, so whether it's similar in size or to the one you described earlier.
We have a number of properties. I'll just give them by like approximate acres. We, in the R1 zoning district, we have a 110-acre property. We have another 55-acre property. We have another one that I believe is 135 acres. We have another one that is 30 acres. Yeah, is that 30 acres? Yeah. So, and we have another one, 35 acres.
It's the one by the water tower,
Which water tower?
Oxford Valley,
Oh,
PA American, off of Oxford Valley Road.
Right near here?
Yeah,
On the
What is
woods
that?
back there?
20 acres.
I don't think there is any open space there.
Not open space land, privately held land. That's not yet.
I don't believe there is any privately owned land right in that location.
Behind 5 Mile Woods.
Oh, that water tower, the other Oxford Valley Road, because there's the water tower
Yeah,
across the
no,
street.
no,
Okay.
that water tower.
Yeah, that's,
Next
I
to
think,
Coles, next to Coles.
yeah, near Coles.
Yeah,
Okay.
okay. Now I'm
Um,
getting it.
I believe that's like a 5 or 10 acre property.
We talked about that.
And of course, we have the Harris tract. That is, I forget the number of acres off the top of my head. But there are still a number of properties.
It's probably under 10,
At least about 10 to 12, maybe.
because you just identified 7. So.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah.
Well, you got the, yeah, about, it's probably like, what's Jennings? 30.
Jennings is 6 acres.
Oh, only 6. That's right. Okay.
And there are several other ones that range in size between 5 and 10 acres throughout the township.
So, all right. So I guess to summarize, because we're not voting on anything today per se, are we?
No, that wasn't
No,
the
this is
intent
just a
all
review.
along.
So I think because the summarize, and I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything in my head. There were 2 big question marks that we've raised, probably more than that, but 2 big ones that stick out in my mind. One is what's included in the open space? And what's that based off of, correct? It's like, does it include the open land and already protected land, or is it outside of that? And the other one is this whole protecting this thing on the sort of extreme end from getting to the extreme end. I don't know that if someone could come up with a better way to summarize it than that. But the concerns that I've sort of been raising the last two meetings about this is I still feel like that's an open item that we don't have a way to address as of yet.
You mean extreme end of lot size?
Oh, yeah, no, yeah, just like the lot size thing, like how do we make sure, how do we do our best on this to make sure that somebody can't come through and take advantage of this and take this in a direction that the township did not intend?
And I think the farmland preservation example is an excellent example of how this all works. I mean, if you look at those developments, the lots are smaller in size, 15 to 20,000 square feet typically, sometimes larger depending. And yet you have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of acres of open space as you drive up Woodside Road, Dolington Road. You just see farmland as far as the eye can see. And in this case, it doesn't necessarily have to be farmland. It could just be lands that are just not used.
No. And I understand. Look, and I do recognize that I'm not talking about the average development here. Like most of the developments here, people aren't, at least even what we've seen, nobody's really trying to get away. All right, sure, somebody's trying to like see if they can get by on the tree ordinance or something, but most people aren't trying to pull anything over on us. But I've seen, like, and I'll go back to, I remember that those meetings on the Harris track back, 6, 7, 8 years ago, when they first proposed splitting up that, subdividing the land, but, telling the township they should be able to take credit for still the whole land and squeeze all the land under the one developable thing so they don't have to remediate the other thing. Right now with this thing that we're proposing right now, if that had happened with this ordinance, they wouldn't even have had to come and talk about subdividing the land. They would have just said, okay, we'll give you 50%, we'll increase our density and we'll build all our houses over here, and they'd be done with it. And that doesn't make us better off. That doesn't protect, that takes away a protection. At least we had the Board of Supervisors, the Planning Commission, the Zoning Hearing Board that were able to answer to this developer and say, no, that's a crazy idea.
Well, that's why a minimum lot size sounds reasonable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we do have that in the ordinance.
Yeah, but I guess if you're up on Linden, if you're up on, was that Lindenhurst up there, and all of a sudden, I mean, you take down and you got a corner of that property, half of that property that's down to 15,000 square foot. I mean, is that what I'm not asking this. I don't look, I have no problem with neighborhoods like that. There are very nice neighborhoods like that. So, but it's like aesthetically, is that what we were going for? Is that what we wanted when we came up with our R1? And I'm look, so I'm not saying I totally understand, like, hey, we get this down to 3/4 of an acre and we got ourselves a nice 20 acre open space. Like, yeah, I totally understand that. But if somebody starts taking this, like, hey, we'll give you 50 acres of open space and we'll stick all these really tight packed houses over here right next door to all these people that purchase homes in R1, what does that do to the township and what does that do to the people that live up there? I think it's a fair question.
To add on to your question, Adrian, since 25% what we're talking about would not include resource protected land, it would be some sort of open space, recreation space. It would seem to me that it would make more sense for that to be open to all township residents if that's not resource protected land. It should, if it's going to change the way R1 or R2, however it might appear, then everybody else should get the benefit of that as well. which would sort of go against having this being taken over by an HOA and would suggest having it being taken over by the township.
And just to share my screen, you could see the northern end of the township. Almost all of these open lands that you see are open lands that were done under a similar cluster type ordinance to what we have proposed. This is under our farmland preservation. You can see the size of the lots. They're all $800,000 to $1 million homes on lots that are a third to half an acre primarily. But they're surrounded by lots of open space. So as you drive down the roads or your lot backs up to everything, you see small lots.
We're not talking about farms here. We're talking about some sort of open space, right? I mean, that's,
Or open space. I mean,
yeah, I mean,
if we just want to see a subdivision more like Dolington Estates, we could see that. Dolington Estates, basically, they took all the land and it's people's yards. So you have this development that I'm circling here. These are all just the 1 acre lots.
Yeah.
Versus this one where you have half acre lots, but you have all of this open space all around it. So
Yeah,
if this is the look we want, we don't need to do anything. We could keep the ordinance just as it is now, and they could just lot out everything and we get no open space at all.
And I guess I'm not, like I said, the only question I'm asking Jim is where's the limit that the township's willing to swallow? Look, that may be fine. You have a more skilled eye than I do looking at the bird's eye view like this. But if half acre is okay from our township standpoint and it works well, then that's fine. But when you talk 15,000 feet, you're still talking about you're still talking about taking it down another 10,000, almost 10,000 square foot lots potentially. I'm just asking, should there be maybe a title limit and just defined by your the region type? What's the maximum we're willing to go what's the maximum we're willing to pay on this one thing to get some open space? And that's all I'm saying. I don't think we're proposing an open, you can do anything you want here. There is a level of, I think, expectation and hopefully trust with the developers that do the right thing. And I'm just proposing we actually put in there something that protects the township from the entity that would go in there and just do whatever they want.
And I would say, I go back again to the maximum density for the tract, and that does kind of protect us. It's a maximum density of the net buildable lot. And so if you add that 25% in, the net buildable lot becomes smaller, and your maximum density would establish how tiny your lots can be.
But as long as there's a minimum
And
lot size,
yeah.
then
Yeah, and so, Jim, I'm talking about section 200-16. I mean, I can share my screen if you guys want me to pull it up.
Sure.
Okay, can you see that? So that's lot area and density for uses other than farmland preservation development. So that basically kind of outlines what the maximum density on net buildable site area, and then a minimum net lot area for that.
That table of performance standards has been revised in this version. So for instance, the very first residential lot, single family detached, it says 0 to 23. In this version, it says 0 to 24. For maximum density, it says 1 per acre. Here in this version of the ordinance, it says 1.25. So there were adjustments made at Jim's recommendations to modify the table of performance standards, assuming 25% of the land was designated open space. Is that
Right.
correct, Jim?
Correct.
So I think that I kind of think that's what I'm getting at, is that we did
Good.
incorporate that into the adjustments. I can stop sharing now.
Yeah, and if we think that there's a certain lot size that we want to have as a minimum that's larger than what we've done in the past, we could certainly do that.
But that table of performance standards that was just shown and discussed only works if it's 25% open space and there's no natural resource protected areas to be protected. We got to figure out how you change the density or performance standards if you're saying 25% open space exclusive of resource protected areas.
I'm
I
not
think it
sure
would
how
be,
you make that work, because that may not be workable. It may not be legally past the muster.
But that's, as I understand what Mr. Weiss was saying, is what the board was looking.
Well, if you have a plot of land with protected resources in it, we already know how many homes, if it's R1 zoning, we already know how many houses, if we don't have any extra open space, would be, correct? Am I wrong? Am I missing something? So if 10% of the tract is protected space, then 90% you do your density on that remaining 90%. Am I missing something, guys?
Well, it's just how do we blend the 25% into that? Is it
Well, that's the question. You
Yeah.
know,
and that's
so,
where it gets at a certain point you won't be able to make it work. You'll basically be saying you can't build on your property, and that's where we might run into troubles. But we can
Yeah.
certainly take a look at that and see if there's how low
But we
can
could
you
also-
go and how far
can-
can you
can
go
we-
to make it work.
Yeah, can we, I mean, for R1 zoning, I'm just going to use R1 zoning as a illustration. You know, we could say you can take a maximum of 25% for open space without changing density of the original calculation. That can't be done, or that can be done?
We'll have to take a look at that and just see how the calculation works, so that, you know, we just want to make sure that it does work, because at the end of the day, you know, we want it to
I can't
work.
see taking like the Jennings property of 6 acres that already gets the building envelope so that you really can't build a second home. We've already been through this exercise. I don't want, you know, I'm sorry, when I say the board, I don't think is proposing that we end up creating, you know, more homes in a smaller lot. We don't want to, we want good open space. We want protected areas, and that can't be changed.
Yeah, and that's a different circumstance altogether on the Jennings property, because he's underneath the number to put on an additional house without zoning relief.
So let me ask this question then. If the goal is to preserve open space in one form or another, does it make more sense to create this open space regulation to deal with lots that have no resource protected lands? Make it applicable only to those that do not have lands that would otherwise be protected?
How many parcels are there that have zero
I don't know.
resource protected
I don't
lands?
well, and then that doesn't account
Zero.
for lots that have 5% of resource protection.
Yeah,
Then that you
and at
wanna
the end of the
put-
day,
yeah.
there are a number of properties that do have not that much in the way of resource protection land on it. So if you take the 25%, a combination of the 5 or 10% with another 15 to 20% to get to that 25%, you're preserving a combination of resource protected land with land. And if you have resource protected land that's greater than 25%, then, I mean, you already are pretty constricted, and we're getting open lands that are just resources, which, quite frankly, a lot of people like to just look at trees, even a swamp, quite frankly. People just like the thought of, wow, there's nothing built on it. But we'll definitely have to take a look at that to see if what Fred had said makes the ordinance workable or not.
Yeah. What I'm worried about, I'm not worried about the farms that will end up being tract homes. I'm more worried about things like the grain unsite, which is a lot of resource protected area. And I don't want to see that overdeveloped. I don't think the board wants to see that overdeveloped. We'd all like to see a lot of open space, but of course, the owners of the land, we have to have some kind of realistic way for them to develop and still protect the resources that we have in the township to not change the character.
Right, so you're saying with a lot that has more than 25%, you don't want to give them an extra ability to just plant more homes on something because they're preserving lands that are already resource protected.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct.
Well, under our current zoning, they actually do get the benefit of that. Just by virtue of having resource protected land that's not built on, they automatically get a higher density. This is what they did years ago. They call it performance zoning. There's other names for it. I can't remember the names, but basically, as you prohibit a developer from developing certain things that you want to protect, woodlands, floodplains, stream corridors, steep slopes, the remaining land you allow them to build at a higher rate on, because I think courts have found that you can't just say you have to build big, large lots on a big, large piece of land, even though most of it's not suitable. And that's kind of what the township did 35 years ago when they first adopted this. And then they furthered that by saying, let's throw in farmland because we'd like to see that preserved. And now this is sort of like the next step. And they're all similar things in that it's the trade-off in that you're taking land away from development and just allowing it to be clustered on a smaller piece of property.
Both Newtown Township and Northampton Township has done this successfully. In the last few years, I think things have, but I've driven through those townships and I've seen probably some encroachment by developers that should have been probably kept as open space. Believe me, I understand the need to protect the open space once it's created. And that's, I mean, the goal of this proposed ordinance is to do just that. If the farmland preservation minimums is not acceptable, let's find something that is. But I said, I don't want to, I don't think anybody on the board of supervisors wants more homes on less land. Overall, the tract, if it has 60 homes, it could still have 60 homes with the open space preservation. But of course, we can't, we don't want 70% open space and then Ben Salem for the rest of it. And that's what
Like
I'm
I
hearing
said,
from the commission.
Yeah, the smallest lot size we have is the 15,000 square feet, which that's comparable. If you go to Fairfield or Farmview, a lot of those are just slightly above that, 0.35 acres, 0.37 acres. I just checked it real quickly. So I think it's something we'll have to take a much closer look at, but I think what we have is workable. I'll just have to give you more examples to show you how it works.
That's just, and some of those examples, Jim, I just encourage you, come back. I mean, we're throwing out things here. You definitely have more experience in this arena than I do. Just stress test it with some of the things, concerns that we're going, and just kind of put our minds at ease that we're not bringing up viable risks. Like right now, I feel like I'm bringing up very viable risks, but I'm totally open to, like with something really empirical showing me that I might be off base on this. I'm just not seeing it yet.
No, understood.
I think by creating limits to the amount of open space and the lot size, I think that would go a long way in cleaning this all up. That's what I'm hearing from the commission.
So
I think so, but I think also Jim needs to tell us after looking at this further if the 25% is just non-resource protected land, whether this works. Right.
all right. I guess is there anything else on this one, or have we kind of taken it everywhere we can go tonight?
I think we've beaten that up enough for tonight.
I
So
agree.
I'll take a look at everything and then circulate stuff back around to everyone with some more examples on just
Okay.
the impact. And we'll go
Right.
from there.
All right, I guess I need to ask, I gotta remember to do this, although I don't think anyone's listening. Is there any public comment on this? Nope.
There are nobody on the phone.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure. Okay, that was it. That was it for the agenda, correct, Jim?
That's it for the agenda.
Okay, well, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second?
Second.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, thanks, everyone.
Have a good night.
All right, see ya. Congrats,
Night.
Frank.